Greetings, this is Pillar Nexus Station Gladiator with part 2 of the game design chat. It's going to be no extra pictures today, just the audio. But I just wanted to go back to those points I brought up at the end of the first one. Automated play, where someone like a player or opponent is represented through some kind of automated system, through like cards or a digital app. I know some games will have solo mode possible by having an automated opponent, like Great Western Trail, or just have the whole enemy side automated, which is Gears of War in its deck. And then there's the app-driven games like XCOM, among others. They provide options to have that that extra presence in the game, or they are pretty much the opposition for the game. Operates on rules and it just follows those until the game ends. I recently picked up the Clockwork expansion for Root and seeing all the different ways you'd have to think about for having factions go automatically. It's a very interesting design consideration. Speaking of fighting an enemy of sorts, there's the teamwork and cooperation idea. Games like Pandemic is just a straight up co-op game of dealing with the spreading disease and curing that. It's a very classic game that I still have a soft spot for Pandemic. It's a good game. There's teamwork of sometimes teams versus teams, like the World of Warcraft adventure. No, just World of Warcraft, the board game. Adventure games, something completely different. But having to coordinate actions and stay on target, there's it can be tough if communication is not your strongest point. And then, as a side thing of teamwork, are the games with the inside trader systems like Battlestar Galactica and I think Werewolf and others. And where you've got people who are not on your side and you have to figure out who they are and try to shut them down, make it harder for them to mess with your plans to try to save everyone. Battlestar Galactica in particular, funny little bit of history with me for that one. That's why our local game group has the Funny Faces rule for anytime they do co-op with Hidden Trader stuff like that. Because the very first time I played Battlestar Galactica, I got a Cylon card and I was probably looking at it wide-eyed like a fool, reading at what I could do as the trader. The Cylon. But that game was hard. That game was massively hard. But let me go back to the World of Warcraft board game for a sec for teamwork, because every player's got their own character and can potentially work independently to build themselves up. But working together, especially early on, is important to not dying too often. Your character dies, you have to go back to town, you have to rest up. It's painful. That's a game I miss, though. I miss it a lot. But I think it's just I didn't have the space to keep it. Anyway, modular maps, battlefield terrain is another thing. The idea that you can rearrange the way the game is played, or you can have this big open space for fighting and placing things down to affect movement, affect range. Uh, Twilight Imperium is the first one that comes to mind for the modular map, as you don't know what worlds you're going to find between you and Mechatol and your opponents. So it's always kind of fun to discover things for the first time, and you have this little inside information of when you're building the galaxy, you know where stuff is going ahead of time. Actually, I think Twilight Imperium was the wrong example. It's good for modular. It's a good example for modular map, but it's not a secret thing. The secret thing would be Thunder's Edge, because that's the one you get the hand of and you place face down, and only you get to know about it. But battlefield terrain for games with big open spaces and all that. It's always interesting to see what people come up with for their own customized terrain for games. I remember way back when a 40K Warhammer 40,000 group had this big terrain set of just dusty streets and broken down buildings, and we loved the hell out of that set. That was so much fun. Urban fighting, and I think there's some games that rather than play on an open field, just have a grid and you can add stuff to it, like Descent. Descent has like blocking terrain and other things. But let's see, another thing I want to point out is oh yeah, that's the big thing about having those modular maps and the terrain is just it adds so much to replayability. Just being able to change things up so much, and it keeps things fresh, you know. But next element is tech tree. Just the idea that you have you're researching things, and you're building out the things you've researched previously to get higher up and access more things. The classic board game Civilization, and yes, there is a board game before the video game. For crying out loud. Yeah. It had like certain categories of tools you can research, and once you have them, you now have bonuses to similar kinds. There were some where you had to have you had to have literacy before you could get to law, I think. And there are other games that do that stuff a little bit differently. Like there's Sid Meier's Civilization, the board game, the Kevin Wilson one, with its tech pyramid. You have 5 levels of technology. Level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 is the end game tech of space travel. But in order to get technology beyond the first, you imagine like 2 cards side by side, and then above it is is 1 card sitting over top of those 2. In terms of the table space, not like literally stacked. And that's pretty much how the tech pyramid was. It would take your starting tech plus like 4 level 1s. Then you need the 4 level 2s and the 3 level 3s and the 2 level 4s, and that would make room for the level 5 that you need to end the game that way. That one was actually a really interesting game too. I think it was like, I almost think it was built off the experience of the Warcraft board game, just because it feels a certain way. And that would kind of make sense, but also fits for Civilization too. I actually have Civ 3, and I need to go back to it at some point. But anyway, you know, there's all sorts of ways to say, hey, you need to have some of these cards before you can get to some of these cards. let's see what else. There's speaking of civilization, trading. The idea that you have resources in game and your opponents have resources, and the two of you can trade with also a possibility of scamming each other as well. Going back to the old Civ board game with, you'd have to like tell the truth of two of the cards, the three you're trading, and then the third card could either be of lesser value or it could be a disaster. There were disasters in that game you could not trade whatsoever, but you trade disasters to your opponents like treachery and piracy and other stuff. Pit is also the classic trading game. I know there are some foundational games before it, but it's the iconic one of everybody starts with a random assortment of commodities and has to trade their way to cornering the market on one of them. But yeah, trading is something I don't really see a whole lot of. So there's Pit. I believe a lot of co-op games offer options to trade cards between players to help each other out. In general, the rule for trading is you're not allowed to contravene the rules of the game through your trades. So everything that players trade between each other has to be within the game itself. You can trade promises that only affect the game. You can't like go to someone with real world money and say, "Hey, I will personally give you $5 out of my pocket if you help me win this game by trading me this and this." You can't do that. That's just messed up, man. But there's that. Um, Miniatures. Miniatures are so much fun. Sometimes, early days, there's like, kind of got screwed on miniatures. Like, they end up using square chits, or there's the low tech option of wooden miniatures. I know Meeples are the classic wooden miniature of tabletop gaming, but really detailed stuff is just awesome to look at. They've got Descent, Journeys into the Dark. I've got Horizon Zero Dawn, the board game. Got Eclipse with the ship expansions, and Clash of Cultures, Monumental Edition, and StarCraft. And it's like, okay, all these miniatures are just really freaking awesome. But man, I want to paint them. I don't think I'd have enough time to paint them all, really. I should challenge myself on the Horizon Zero Dawn at least, because I have a ton of those miniatures. It's a very rare game that comes with miniatures already painted. Dungeon Command was one of them. Mage Knight and the Clicks games were another one. But yeah, the right miniatures for the right game make a big difference. Although sometimes I have to wonder where sometimes it's just a little too much. The Court of the Dead is a nice game. The miniatures are nice, but man, it's basically a worker placement kind of game, and it seems like wow, the miniatures feel like overkill at times. Probably have a cheaper game if I, taking it back a step, but it's probably part of why the game is so cool in the first place is those minis. But anyway, on finally combat, I almost wanted to set aside an entire game design episode for combat, but man, it ties in with the battlefield terrain and the miniatures and everything, and dice. There's so many different games of just ways for players to can fight each other, or that's the point of the game, is to have your players fight it, have player characters fighting each other, like Frag, or Adrenaline. So let's talk about both. I want to talk about both Frag and Adrenaline for a minute. They are both games meant to simulate the first-person shooter experience. Frag is a game that uses a lot of dice and requires a lot of math. Adrenaline is a game that uses no dice and relies on a symbol system of this is what your attack does, shown right on the card. And there's two very different ways of running combat in those games. Another difference is, Frag is a big grid, while Adrenaline is like about 10 to 12 little chambers connected either as like hallways or by doors. So keeping the scale in mind with combat is important to, keeping things balanced and interesting. Then there's, the great big army games like Warhammer 40K, and the like gigantic battalion kind of games like Epic and War Master, of just building up forces of your choosing in accordance with the limits set by the book and the scenario, and just having to fight on some great field of terrain and just making an epic spectacle of grand warfare. That can be a lot of fun. There are memories to be made in big war games like that, especially with the miniatures being painted and based and looking really nice. What other forms of combat? Soccer arms, that's right. I always like to come back to soccer arms because I just like that one. Where you've got there it's a very the distance is just a line that either goes up or down from like 0 or to 10. And very straightforward system there. You don't have to worry about line of sight or terrain or anything. If the distance is the same as your range for your card, you make the attack, and your opponent can react to it if they have a reaction card. And either hits their aura or hits their life. It's just a fairly straightforward system. And then there's card games with their combat systems like Magic, where you declare attackers, and your opponent gets to declare blockers, and damage gets dealt, and there's opportunities to play spells to affect the combat. And there's like what I have lately, like a Wedge Force, where there's like 3 different ways of attacking. One's for if your opponent has no defense. One is if you're pretty sure you can outpower your opponent. And one is I need stock, I need to do it without dying. That's side attack. But yeah, there's just all sorts of combat to think about in games. Ranging from complex stuff to simple. Whoever has more tokens is very much going to win this. Um, do I want to do a part three for game design chat? I'm thinking that if I ever do a part three of this, it is going to be talking about things that annoy me, things that bug me a lot, and I try not to be too negative sometimes. But I think there are times when there's like too much of something or not enough of things, and that gets on my nerves. Um, I will make a list of things that I can put under that umbrella, and that will be the next game design chat. Thank you for listening. This has been Pillar Nexus. See you next time.